Hi, everyone. I see that folks are starting to come in. Um, and there was no sound, Neil. Get your comment in the chat. Now there is sound. Hopefully everyone can hear me just fine. I'm so excited to be able to have the opportunity to kick off this webinar. Just as a reminder, it is being recorded. We will capture without names the majority of the chat, and we will be posting this on the Internet Archive later on today or at the latest within the week. So we really, really appreciate you coming. I'm going to let a couple more people come in as we get past 1 p.m. here on the East Coast. But just hang tight and we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Rose Halpern, the Director of Library Futures at NYU's Engelberg Center for Innovation, Law, and Policy. I'm going to be sharing links to some of the projects and information referenced in today's discussion. These links will also be included in the follow-up email that you'll get later this week. So welcome to our book talk for Shamichael Hallman's new book, Meet Me at the Library, which is co-hosted with our friends at News Futures. You can submit questions through the Q&A feature, and they will be answered aloud or via chat within the constraints of the webinar. And again, this meeting is being recorded, and it is also being transcribed if you need or want captions. So we're so excited to invite Shamichael today. His book, Meet Me at the Library, was published this year to great acclaim, so much so that it is actually sold out in a couple of places. So we want to make sure that you get your copies in time for the holidays, and we're going to be sharing a discount link in the chat in just a moment. We'll share it periodically through the talk so that you can definitely get a copy of it. So in his words, as part of the book blurb, America is facing an epidemic of loneliness and isolation with troubling effects on our mental and physical health. We live in one of the most divisive times in our history, one in which we tend to work, play, and associate only with people who think as we do. How do we create spaces for people to come together, to open our minds, understand our differences, and exchange ideas? So just as a reminder, our community norm is that we seek to create a safe and welcoming environment for our community. We encourage you to ask questions that respect the expertise of our speakers and challenge us to think boldly about the road ahead. And now for our speakers. We have Shamichael Hallman here. He is a visionary leader in civic health and community development, currently serving as the Director of Civic Health and Economic Opportunity at the Urban Libraries Council. In his role, he champions the vital role of libraries as essential city infrastructure, connecting diverse communities, enhancing public safety, and driving economic opportunities for underserved populations. We also have Sierra Singeti Daniels, a journalist, educator, and media organizer. She is the program director at Press Pass NYC, working to start and sustain student journalism programs in New York City public schools. She also works as a steward for News Futures, a community of practice housed at City Bureau, working to build a world where local news systems have been transformed to equip people to participate in civic life. In 2021, she co-founded People's Perception Project, a civic engagement company for middle and high school students, where she designs programs like student-centered journalism, a collaboration between a school and a local newsroom. Jenny Garner has been a public librarian for over 20 years. Her work as a library director centers on inclusive policy development and removing barriers to library services, an active member in the community. She serves as a board member for Inside Out Reentry, an organization that assists people returning from incarceration, and is also active in the Iowa Library Association and Association for Rural and Small Libraries. So before we get started, I'm going to give our panelists an opportunity to just talk a little bit about themselves, what brings them here, and what keeps them passionate about the kind of work that they do, starting with Sierra, and then we'll head into the book discussion. Thank you again for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Over to you, Sierra.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you to Library Futures for hosting. I'm super excited to be in conversation with Shamichael and Jenny Gardner. So yeah, as Jenny kind of read in my introduction, I identify as a journalist, educator, and media organizer because my work really is bridging those spaces, like whether it's through News Futures, where I support nonprofit newsroom leaders and civic media researchers, or with Press Pass NYC, where I train the next generation of civic-minded journalists, or even through my own company, People's Perception Project, empowering young people to create positive change. My focus is always on justice, on civics, and convening people to share critical information. And I think that's a big reason that I'm super excited for this book talk. I think it's so relevant to all the work that I do. So I'll just take a moment to talk a little bit about News Futures, since we are sponsoring this event, give you a little bit about who we are and what we do. So in 2018, well, since 2018, really, News Futures has been a collective of people, ideas, and spaces that are really focused on building this participatory and networked future for local news. Our work is really founded on principles that help leaders from across the news and information field strategize, build, and recharge together. So we're all about building out our community. Our work is really rooted in a bias toward action, primarily through our peer-led working groups that News Future supports through conceptual, logistical, and financial resources. So I figured I'd talk about just maybe two of our working groups that we did this past year, just to give you guys an idea of the kind of work that we support and what we're doing at News Futures. One of the working groups that we are kind of closing out from 2024 as we prepare to launch 10 more working groups in 2025. I think some people in this room might be interested in learning about. It was called the Civic Media Census. So this was worked on and led by Nina Weingrill with support from Kate Harlow. And the report really provided an overview of the key characteristics of local news and local civic organizations throughout the United States. So Nina interviewed, 18 leaders of civic organizations to really understand the operational structures, leadership diversity, governance, fundraising challenges, and future goals for the organization, really to help us make sense of this civic media field that is emergent. And you'll hear us kind of talk about that a lot today, I think. And then one other group that you might be interested to learn about was about community media centers. This was run by Antoine Haywood and his co-contributor, Kristen Clark. So Antoine and Kristen really used this group to document and share how community media centers provide vital community space, programming, and infrastructure to this growing civic media movement that we're talking about. So with News Futures, we really try to support an array of diverse work and people in the field. In a lot of ways, I feel like we're kind of just getting started with our potential reach. And I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of tease some of the work that we have coming out in January. So in early 2025, we'll invite people to sign our charter and join us in this goal of seeing a vibrant civic life for all communities. We're really, as News Futures, thinking about our work as cross-sector. So as of January, we will be opening up our community to include people that work in libraries and other civic spaces outside of journalism. So, if this work really resonates, we'd love to hear from you and love to have you kind of join our community and help us, envision this civic life for communities across the country. So excited to be here, and I'll pass it over to Shamichael.
Thanks, Sierra. I'm Shamichael Hallman. I am currently with the Urban Libraries Council. Before that, though, I was with the Memphis Public Library System. And in that role for about 6 years, I got to oversee the reimagining and renovation of historic library branch in downtown Memphis. And there, the work that we were doing was a part of a larger national initiative called Reimagine the Civic Commons, which is playing out in 10 cities right now. And just looking at how do we think about public space, our parks, our libraries, our community centers, and these sorts of civic assets. And particularly in the library project, we were trying to look at a number of principles that the Civic Commons Initiative was moving forward. One of those principles was kind of a question of how might we bring people of all backgrounds into public life and reconnect communities to civic assets where trust can be formed, right? Which is very, very important as we think about the levels of trust that people have in institutions and in each other. And so really behind this principle was the fact that, or an idea that civic assets that are designed for a wide range of ages and interests and abilities provide common ground for people to enjoy shared experience and participate in public life. That was a core principle. Another principle that really undergirded that project was this idea, this question of how might we welcome everyone and create opportunities for shared experience among people of all incomes and backgrounds, right? And sort of what's driving that, or what was driving that question, was this thought that for people to use public space, they must feel welcomed in them. And actively encouraging people of all backgrounds to take advantage of public space creates opportunities for shared experience. And within those shared experiences, you can build trust, and you can sort of reinforce people's sense of membership and belonging in a community. And that work was well received, that we did in Memphis. It's been recognized nationally and internationally for the work that it did and is continuing to do to bring the diversity of Memphis together. Shortly after my departure from Memphis, I had an opportunity to study for a year at Harvard under the Loeb Fellowship, which is an amazing opportunity to go and sort of think about, these sort of bigger issues. And there I got to explore belonging through a number of dimensions. At the design school, I got to really think about what is the role of design and sort of physical design and programmatic design. How do we create opportunities for people to belong? Through a social lens and through a faith lens, I sort of dug very deeply into the interfaith movement to try to see what was happening there that allowed people from across different belief systems to come together and create opportunities to talk to one another. And so all of these things sort of became the foundation for the book, Meet Me at the Library, that I'm excited to dig into shortly. I'll pass it over to Jenny.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I'm super excited to be here with Library Futures and with Sierra and Shamichael. I got my start in libraries way back as a volunteer in our library. So I lived next door to the library. So the library became an immediate community space for me when I moved to this area in North Liberty. And I joke that I've worked in 3 libraries, sometimes I feel like I've worked in 3 libraries because our library has grown and expanded so much since I started. We were a town of about 4,500 when I moved here straight out of college. And now 20 some years later, 30 years later, we are over 20,000. So we keep growing and bursting at the seams. So what does that look like for us? It looks like trying to ensure that not only we are providing services that meet the needs of our community, but as we grow, that our staff feels that trust and comfort in their roles, because that flows outward for us. So when I started as director just over 10 years ago, one of my main goals was how do we build that positive workspace that then organically becomes a space where everyone feels they belong and can come in, as Shamichael mentioned. We want people to feel that they are invited not just into the library, but they are invited to the table to help make decisions about where the library's direction is, and move our gauge whenever we need to. We know that our policies and our strategic plan build the foundation for the work we do. So from those very internal documents moving outward, we're always looking for ways to create connection and belonging, inclusion, and access is a huge piece of our work as well.
Awesome. Well, that was great to hear from you guys. I think that we're going to get into the conversation now. And I think we're going to start with Shamichael and then invite Jenny a little bit later on to kind of talk a little bit more of like the boots on the ground perspective. So I'll start us off with the first question here, Shamichael, directed towards you. So I was really excited to see Eric Liu, who is a founder of Citizen University, which is the civic engagement organization, really write the forward of your book. I actually use one of his definitions of power in some of my work with young people, People's Perception Project. He says that power is not good or bad. It's how you use it. And it's just the ability to make other people do what you do. So I thought like it was great that Eric got to write that forward for you. But Eric Liu calls you a master civic gardener. He describes community as a garden that thrives with care, which I thought is just so beautiful. But what do you think led him to this metaphor? And how do you see yourself embodying this in your work?
Well, as you, Sierra, I have a deep love and appreciation and respect for Eric. Uh, he and our relationship now goes back almost 8 years. When I started on this library project, or when I was, given the opportunity to be a part of this project, Eric was one of the first people that folks introduced me to and said, "Hey, if you're going to be talking about anything civic related in libraries, you need to go talk to Eric." And at the time, Eric and his organization, Citizen University, was getting ready to host this event that they call Citizen Fest. And they wanted to do it in 3 cities across the US. And I heard about it maybe just a little bit before the deadline was approaching. And so, of course, I threw Memphis's name in the hat and ended up being chosen along with Dallas and New Orleans. And Citizen Fest sort of became the foundation by which uh, Eric and I and the CU team started working. Citizen Fest was this sort of free, festive summit on how to exercise civic power, right? Really starting with that definition that you lifted up. And this provided us an opportunity to bring together activists and artists and everyday citizens to blend art and creativity and sort of the concrete skills of effective change making, right?
Mhm.
And throughout this was a day-long conference, and throughout the session, we had these sort of breakouts. One of them was the role of community anchors. So, hey, what role do our libraries and parts of the community center play in creating a community? One of them was around increasing the number of people in public office. So we titled that conversation, "Are You Next?" Um, and this was, us seeing a need, seeing an opportunity in Memphis and saying, how might we show up? How might we figure out the role that we play as individuals, but also the role that the library might play? And so when I think about that sort of gardener, civic gardener analogy that Eric uses, he talks about this a lot, actually, that when you think about a garden, there is uh, an amount of tending and watering and feeding that you have to do, right? And that in this country in particular, that while many of us sort of have a very overdeveloped or consumer muscle, that often it's this civic muscle that we need to flex more of. And you'll hear Eric say that a lot. And so for me, Sarah, I have just tried to figure out the many, many different ways that I, as an individual, and the library as an entity, could find ways to show up in our community. And there were many ways, right? That when you have this outward orientation to the community, when you're constantly in the community, you're talking to folks, you're doing these outreach events, you begin to understand very quickly the ways that public libraries can show up in communities and come alongside other organizations that are doing really great work.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're definitely gonna talk more about the specific programs that are happening across the country in libraries and things that stand out to you too. But one thing I wanted to ask you that was actually not in the book, but just doing some research, I discovered your TED Talk. It's called Reimagining the Public Library to Reconnect the Community. And in that TED Talk, you shared a really powerful story about a woman named Grace, whose courage in 1960 deeply impacted you. So can you share today some of Grace's story that you shared in that TED Talk and explain to us how meeting her has shaped your perspective on the role of libraries?
Yeah, Grace was one of a few very special individuals that I got to meet when I first got to the library. So the library that I was a part of, that I was working with in Memphis, was called Cosset. It's called Cosset Library. It was named after the benefactor. And the library dates back to the late 1890s. And for the first really 6 decades, 5.5 decades of the library's existence, Black people had little to no access to this library. There was actually another branch down the street that the Black people had to go to. And what happens is, of course, there is a lawsuit in 1957 filed by an African-American male that goes nowhere, really. And a couple of years later, a series of sit-in demonstrations are done by young Black college students, young Black individuals who say, hey, this is wrong. Like the library should be for everyone, right? And Grace was amongst those individuals who went to public libraries, went to public spaces throughout Memphis, and was willing to risk their freedom for it. In fact, many of these individuals, like Grace, were arrested, were thrown in jail for simply trying to ensure that the library was a space where everyone could actually show up.
Yeah.
And so to think about the fact that, me as a Black man in 2017 became the manager of a branch that in 1960 Black people couldn't even have access to was quite an incredible experience. And when I got to meet Grace and I got to meet some of these other individuals at a library event that we did honoring their work, it just sort of became a defining moment for me to let me know that, the work is not finished, and that we have to always make sure that the library is a space where people, regardless of their background and their race and their income levels, a space where people can show up. And also honoring the trailblazers, or the people like Grace who, if not for them, where would we be? And so when you go to that library now, if you're ever in Memphis, I hope that you would definitely check out all of the libraries, but definitely go to the Cosset Library. But when you step inside of that library right now, you're going to see two things. One is you're going to see a huge mural that's about 10 feet high, about 30 feet long, that portrays the trial that ultimately led to the desegregation of the library system. It was actually 5 Black lawyers who tried that case. Also, a lot of history there, right? But then to the left of that, you're going to see the names of people like Grace and others who played a significant role in that. And so it's just something that inspired me and continues to inspire me to this day.
Wow. That is such an incredible story. I think so much of that is like a lesson too. Of like when we're trying to do this deep like engagement work, when we're trying to like welcome people into our space, we can't ignore the past. We can't ignore history. And that mural that you just like beautifully described and help us visualize, I think that that's such an example of that, of acknowledging the past, acknowledging the harm, and creating space that pushes us beyond that, to kind of live out that dream of welcoming everyone. So I think
Absolutely.
that's, yeah, so it's so beautiful that you kind of got to like lead that as well too, and meet Grace. So that's a lesson I think for a lot of people to take doing this sort of like community engagement work.
Yeah.
So the first chapter of the book is called Lonely and Divided, which definitely stood out to me. You mentioned that in 2023 that the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on the healing effects of social connection and community. How do you see loneliness and polarization impacting communities? And specifically, what roles can libraries play in bridging those divides?
Yeah, this is really the heart of the book. And I mentioned that I spent a year at Harvard, sort of playing around with this idea, really digging deeper into it. And the question that I had was the sort of one question that I took with me to that fellowship was, it was number one, an acknowledgement that we are as polarized and as isolated and lonely as perhaps we've ever been, right? And so the question that I took there was, what is the role of public space in a society that is increasingly polarized, isolated, and divided? And it was at that time that I came across the Surgeon General's advisory, which it's I think it's about 82 pages, and then probably another 300 or 400 links of research there. It's an amazing read, though. And in that advisory, we see the importance of social connection. And social connection is really sort of thought about as the size and diversity of someone's social network, and the roles and functions that those that those relationships play. And within the advisory, we see that when these things are not present, when this sort of diversity of relationships and connections are not present, that it leads to social isolation, it leads to loneliness, right? And at the individual level, this is very interesting. At the individual level, the effects of this are far-reaching, that there are increases in negative effects related to cardiovascular disease, to hypertension, to diabetes, to depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts, right? And but the other thing is that this is not just happening at the individual level, that there are effects that are also happening at the societal level, that we have communities that feel a little less safe, that we have communities that are polarized, that we have decreased levels of civic engagement, right? And all of this is tied back to this idea of this idea or this concept of social isolation. Now, there are a number of factors that affect that. There are individual factors such as where a person is in life, their life stage, right? Their age, their income levels, their socioeconomic status. But there are also community factors when we think about the availability of spaces, the availability of parks and libraries, when we think about the efficiency of transportation. And I think one of the things that I really pulled from that report was sometimes we tend to think of loneliness as just an individual problem. But what the advisory was getting at in part was that this actually comes down in many ways to how our communities are designed, right? And the various inequities that accompany that sometimes the distribution of high quality public spaces are not evenly distributed. The way that public transit works isn't evenly distributed, right? That certain communities don't have these levels of access. And so I think when you look at sort of the closing of that advisory and you look at the list of recommendations, it's interesting because there's a range of sectors and individuals and entities that are talked about there. Like the advisory talks about the role of philanthropy. It talks about the role of education and entertainment and government. And of course, one of the major recommendations there is the need for social infrastructure. And it defines social infrastructure as the physical assets of a community, libraries and parks, the programs and the policies that support the development of social connection. I think particularly as we think about libraries, there's one piece of research here that's embedded in the advisory that is a framework of belonging, a conceptual framework of belonging. And it talks about essentially four components of belonging. The first component is the competency for belonging, right? So this is sort of the having the ability to connect and experience belonging, right? The skills that people need to be able to relate to others, to be able to identify with their cultural background, to be able to develop a sense of identity. The second element is the opportunity to belong. This is that people actually need the availability of space. There needs to be some place where people can go, right, to actually show up, that actually enables belonging to occur. The third area is motivation to belong, right? That people actually, there has to be things for people to actually do. And one of the things that I came across here as I was looking at that was this interesting framework that Mary Davis Fournier, who is now the president Public Library Association, works on, called categorizing library programs. And it's kind of an outcome, a way of looking at outcomes that libraries can produce. And they actually had 7 categories. One was that participants learn new skills, right? And that's, of course, an amazing way to learn new people is that if you're learning a new skill together. Another one of these is that participants change their behavior on something, right? So let's say that you're going to the library to exercise, right? You want to get healthier in your financial health, right? That there's sort of these range of different types of programs that are happening that people say, oh, I care about my health. I care about my financial future. I care about the things, the way that I'm prepping meals, right? These things provide an opportunity for people to actually connect. And then lastly here, and I'll stop here, that fourth element in that perceptions, the belongings piece is perception for belonging. So this is the way that do people actually feel welcome? Do they feel like they actually belong when they step into a space? And one of the things that I look at in the book is I talked to this group of researchers at the University of New Mexico who have been studying how cultural humility shows up in libraries. And it's really, really phenomenal work. And so to come back to your question about like, well, what is the unique role of libraries? I believe this with all my heart. There are, when we think about indoor public spaces, there are not many remaining spaces where people can just walk in and be. Spaces that don't require your wallet or your soul, right? You can just show up, right? Libraries are one of those few remaining spaces where people actually have that. And I think it's an important thing for us to think about as we talk about public libraries.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is saying that not all libraries right now are operating like this, right? Like there's a very real reality that someone on this call might say, well, my library is not doing all of these things or opening up their doors in this full way. But I think like what's awesome about this book and a lot of what you're talking about is just like this civic renewal, right? Of like, how can we get where we want to go, right? And how can we get people on board and get them to participate in where we want to go? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that idea that you introduced in the book of civic renewal, right? So you talk about like this dynamic culture of civic renewal, and you want to achieve it by 2030, which really isn't that far away. So for those unfamiliar with this civic renewal term, can you tell us what does this look like? And how do you think that we can kind of get there and achieve this vision?
Yeah, so that concept of civic renewal comes out of a working group that I was a part of, that I was invited to join, that was organized by a woman named Carolyn Lucasmeyer. Carolyn is a longtime advocate and thought leader in this space, and Carolyn brought together a diversity of people who were looking at sort of the current state of democracy and civic engagement in this country. And through a number of conversations, we landed on about 9 themes of what civic renewal might look like. Like what would need to be required to get to a place of civic renewal. Like what does that actually look like? And certainly I can't talk through all 9 of those things, but I want to talk through 3 of them, and I think it'll give us a little bit of meat to chew on here. The first one is that a new birth of civic renewal throughout America requires constructive collaboration among citizens, leaders, and institutions, right? That we have to think that this is both a bottom-up and a top-down approach, that we have to ground civic renewal in local communities. And Sarah, I know this is a heart of your work, that yes, there are things that are happening at the national level in terms of rhetoric, in terms of policy, but so much of what actually runs our society, our country, is actually happening at the local level. And so we want to see what's happening there at that local level, encourage it, amplify it, and really learn from some of the really great things that are happening at the local level. The second one is a recognition that in order to bring people together, we actually need spaces, right? We actually need spaces for people to be able to show up. Libraries, museums, cafes, churches, places that are easily accessible and that are able to cultivate cross-racial, cross-cultural, cross-partisan, and interdisciplinary thinking about life, about issues, about things that are affecting our community. Spaces that allow people to listen, to learn, to empathize, to deliberate, and to problem solve in a way that makes sense for them in their communities, right? And then sort of a third theme here is that from this work, or as a part of this work, that we have to begin to create new narratives about this country, narratives that illuminate the rich and painful experiences of our nation, right? Stories that are inclusive of the full range of experiences that many people want to tell, right? And so civic renewal really is looking at how do we change the narrative? How do we change this narrative of isolation, polarization, of sort of fragmentation in our country, and sort of recognizing that that is going to require a different type of infrastructure.
It's not just journalists telling better stories.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think we sort of come to a place where we recognize that this civic infrastructure maybe not quite at sort of classic definition of social infrastructure, but this civic infrastructure is really looking specifically at this problem of renewal, this opportunity of renewal, and saying, hey, we believe that there are at least 4 core elements to this. That number one, we have to have places for people to be able to show up. Number 2, we have to actually have people who are equipped to be able to receive people, right? Like again, I talk about this work in cultural humility. I think the beautiful thing about public libraries and places like public libraries is that they are places where everybody indeed can show up. But that means that we need people who are able to receive people. Like, you know, the one question that I sort of asked our staff in Memphis was, okay, what happens if everybody actually shows up? What happens if every segment of this community actually comes in the doors, right? Because that's going to bring some level of tension, right? But it's also going to bring some level of beauty and collaboration. And sort of what's the skill set that we need as a staff to be able to handle that? And I think Jenny will be able to talk beautifully about that in a little bit. But there are 2 other things that are needed as a part of that infrastructure. Not just places, not just people. We also need to reimagine local news, right? We need to be able to reimagine the stories that we tell and the people who are able to tell those stories. And then lastly, we have to think about funding mechanisms, and we'll talk about that a little bit more about that later. But to be able to actually fund this work in a way that is sustainable.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think, yeah, those definitions of like the social infrastructure, the civic infrastructure, and the 2 of them working at the same time simultaneously to kind of build out this civic renewal is a really helpful way of thinking about how to kind of do this work. So yeah, now we're going to talk a little bit about those kind of like innovative library projects that are actually doing like boots on the ground community engagement. So in your book, you introduced this project called the Human Library Project that was started in Copenhagen in Denmark. So can you describe what the Human Library Project is and share what it was like for you to actually participate in one of these sessions?
Yeah, well, I think some of the library folks on the call are gonna know about the Human Library, but if you don't, it's really amazing. The Human Library is a global nonprofit organization, and it offers a unique platform where individuals serve as books, and they share their experiences with readers in a one-on-one or a small group conversation. And I had been following the Human Library for years. It was kind of one of the first works and movements that I saw when I came into the library space. And I always thought like, man, I really want to make one of these things happen at the library, you know, at some point in time. And of course, it didn't quite work out for me. But when I started writing the book, I reached out to the Human Library. I said, hey, man, like I've been following you all for years, and I would love just to kind of get a quote from you, you know, about like how you see yourselves fitting into this work with libraries. And they said, yeah, of course we'll talk to you. I ended up talking to a gentleman named Ben Karen, who runs the U.S. operations, and Ben pointed me to this library in Grand Junction, Colorado, the Mesa County Library System. It's a phenomenal library, and Ben said, "Hey, man, like if you're talking to libraries who are doing human libraries, like you got to go talk to Mesa County. You got to go check it out." So I get on the phone with them, and they said, "Yeah, we got one. We're planning one pretty soon. Like, why don't you come out and be a part of it?" And I said, yeah, of course, I want to document what this thing actually looks like. I want to see what's happening here. And then a couple of weeks later, they called me and they said, well, hey, like, would you be a book as well? And I said, well, sure, like, let's do it, right? And we get on a call and I'm meeting these folks who are going to serve as books, you know, and there's someone who is transgender. There's someone who is a returning citizen that has spent many years in the prison system. There was a former gang member, right? You know, the sort of people that you might not necessarily bump up to or have a conversation with in your regular everyday life. And they brought us together and we went through a training experience, and they said, okay, well, hey, we're going to do this event. On the day of the event, people are going to come and they're going to ask you questions, right? And you know, they're going to, we encourage people to be open, you know, and ask things that they maybe don't feel comfortable asking, but they have to do it in a respectful way. And so for me, Sierra, like I recently moved to the DC area. And for me here recently, like I'm a runner, I jog a lot. And in the neighborhood that I've lived in, I've noticed that in my jogging, that people would like walk on the other side of the street as they saw me come in their direction. You know, these were mainly women, right? And so this sort of fear of the tall, dark black man, right?
Yeah.
Who would go to the other side of the street or would turn around when they saw me jogging in their direction. And that became a very jarring experience for me. Like, I'm just going out and just doing my thing. I'm just, just trying to stay healthy, trying to stay fit. And to see people like literally see me coming, walk to the other side of the street, I pass and they come back on the other side of the street, really makes you start to reevaluate things. And so for me, like, I stopped wearing dark clothing, right? I stopped accelerating because I didn't, I was like, okay, hey, if there's a sudden change in pace, someone's going to maybe think that I stole something, right? I made sure that I didn't run by women because I didn't want to bump up against someone and someone say, oh, well, hey, this dude's trying to touch me inappropriately, right? And as I sat down at the library in Mesa County to talk about this experience, this kind of, I'm this human book, there were a lot of perfect white women who sat in front of me and said, I had no idea. I really didn't know. I really yeah, maybe I am sometimes scared. There are images in the media of black men that are, like, you don't get to see a lot of images of whatever, right? And as I was sort of watching the other conversations that were happening, you could sort of see people saying, oh, wow, I never considered that. I never thought that this is this person's life, right? And so I think the human library is beautiful in that way, in that it provides an opportunity for people to bump up against and talk to people that they wouldn't have an opportunity to do otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's so personal, so real, and so wrong in so many ways too.
Yeah.
Clearly you're like a jolly, friendly guy. What are these people thinking? But no, like the stereotypes and everything run deep, and it's very real when you're thinking about like trying to bring people together. You talked about like Ben Karen, and there was one part of the book. I do have the book, so I hope everyone buys it. You got to show the book. I'm actually going to read this quote from him about the Human Library Project, because it's totally stuck with me. And I think a lot of what he's talking about shows up for me especially when I'm working with young people, of like this fear of not knowing, or this fear of showing that you're a beginner in something. And I think it's so important to the work we're doing. So in the book, you quote him and he says, the Human Library Project, it's a safe space for you to take risks. It's a safe space for you to get something wrong. And he says, this is what stood out to me. We find in the organization that oftentimes what keeps people from the conversation in the first place is they're so scared of offending somebody. They're so scared of getting something wrong. They're so scared of revealing that they're a beginner that they'll stay away from the conversation altogether to sort of protect themselves from those experiences. And I just think that is like a super profound quote to include in the book, and really speaks to the why that we need to be doing this work, and why we need to be so intentional about the way that we're bringing people together. And I think, the Human Library is such an innovative and creative way to have those difficult conversations. So hopefully one day I get to be involved in some of this innovative library programming.
Yeah. Well, hey, Jenny Garn's on the phone. You just need to go to her library because you'll see it.
Yeah, so this is a perfect time to welcome Jenny Garner into the conversation. So excited to talk with you. So Jenny, you've been with the North Liberty Library for over 20 years. And as a director since 2014, you've shifted its focus from telling the community what the library offers to asking what the community needs. I think that's a really profound transformation. And could you share how this change has shaped the library's programming and its role in the community?
Yeah, I think first and it's morphed, right? So when we started, we were going out and saying, hey, what do you need from us? What can we do? What's within our reach? To really taking a serious look at access, at existing barriers, and acknowledging that there are barriers that we put up ourselves as librarians or whatnot, and looking at ways we can create an avenue for yes every time someone walks into our doors, and inviting them to be here. So we focus a lot on community engagement. We focus a lot on self-expression and creativity in our programming, inviting people to just be in our space, and what we would say linger. When we when we renovated and expanded in 2014, right before I started as a director, we really looked at we wanted the space to be a place where people felt comfortable to stay, wanted to be in our space. And think we've achieved it sometimes to our detriment, but we wanted our programs to reflect people and also to provide them, as Shamichael mentioned, an opportunity to broaden their viewpoints and see beyond the borders of our city what we offer. We know that not everyone gets to travel around, gets to go even sometimes out of state. So we wanted to create that environment where people felt comfortable, where they could come in a safe environment and learn more, much like we do with our collections. I think the biggest benefit of this shift has been that we've increased our visibility in the community and expanded our reach, and also become a really integral part of the city. So when they're doing things, they often look to the library. City leaders, my city administrators called me and said, hey, this city leader called and wanted to compliment the library that they couldn't believe that your staff provided this expertise during a meeting, things like that. So we make sure that we're out in the community a lot. And it's not just me going out, it's all of our staff, from our full-timers to our part-timers, doing this work. One of the keys to focusing is giving that staff the flexibility to do that. It also creates challenges. It's not easy, especially when you have a small staff. There's only 21 of us. Sometimes it's knowing who's going to be running the library, or wait, who's actually in the building right now. The library is known in the community for showing up and adding value to things. We have a program called City Slate, which is actually sponsored by our community relations department. And that program has gone so well. It does exactly what Shamichael talks about, which is bringing as many people together. It started during COVID. How can we safely bring people together in an outdoor space and provide programming that's free to all people, so it's accessible? And now we do about 30 to 40 programs a year. And the community relations department, the beauty of it is they raise all the funds for it. We've got businesses and even the University of Iowa saying, how can we be at the table? How can we give you money to do this work? So it's also benefited us and our programming, because a lot of our programming gets covered under that slate funding. Where we were once elbowing our way to the table, we're now being invited to the table and asked to be in the trenches doing the work and scheduling. Just lends credibility to us. It also lets people know that, yeah, they can come in and we're going to find a balance and prioritize for them when they walk through our doors. So it's been wonderful.
Yeah. I think, so much about this is relationship building too, right? Like, you're talking about like the visibility, right? And people are calling you. Like, I know that is relationships that are making that happen. And I know a lot of people on the call probably are doing this sort of community engagement work, whether it's through the news or through libraries. So I wanted to ask you, in the book, you credit a lot of this success to the partnerships, like I was saying, with the community leaders, educators, and other civic orgs. But what advice would you give to libraries or other nonprofit organizations like journalism who are looking to build and maintain these meaningful relationships with their communities? What advice do you have for them?
Sure. I would also would be totally negligent if I didn't credit our staff. We have an incredible team, and a lot of my work and my advice to people who are in the trenches, but also the people who are administrating, is to step out of the way and extend trust. When we extend trust, people thrive. Both, and then when we extend trust within, that just spreads without pretty naturally. So I think one of the things that libraries do really well is to, and perhaps other organizations, including the media, could emulate or learn from, is offering that space for learning rather than being didactic in our teaching, or just providing opportunities for people to garner information, to gather information, and make decisions for themselves. So we don't think of, I personally and our staff does not think of the libraries as neutral, but we truly do believe that we have a responsibility to be a safe space for our most marginalized folks, and to raise their voices where they may not otherwise be able to have their voices raised. And that can be really effective, and it can be done in a way that provides them engagement opportunities and learning opportunities, where we lay the framework and we provide the ground rules for it. And then we step back and we just moderate while they do the work. We're not overtaking it. We're not running the show necessarily. We're just giving the space for people to learn and grow together. As much as I wish that I could push my own agenda sometimes and do these things, it's not our job to be the persuaders. It's our job to give space to the ideas so that people can grow and take shape for themselves. It's really about empowering them. I would give this story as a reference. We do teen lit crates and we do adult lit crates where people can fill out a form, and then we hand select materials for them. It's usually 3 titles. They get a box. It's got the titles in it. It has some bling. It might have some stickers. It might have a bookmark. It might have some candy or some comfort food in it. So that they get to keep everything, and then they bring the books back. And we did one in 2020, and we focused on Black Lives Matter because we do believe that it is our place to do these things and to provide these opportunities. And we had a new family come to town with 3 teenage kids, and the dad came in and shoved the lit crate at our staff and said, "We didn't come here to have your agenda pushed down our throats." And my staff was really upset, and they came back to me and they're like, "What do we do? What do we do about this?" This was a young girl who had checked every box. She wanted to learn all the things. And her dad had made her bring the book crate back. It had a free book in it with an author signed copy of a book. And that was all returned to us. And I said, just as we provide space to people and provide opportunities for people to learn, we are not here to judge what they do at home. It's not our space. We might not like it, but it's not our place to tell them what they get to take home or what they don't, just like we don't want them to tell us what to carry in the library and have on our shelves. So instead, why don't you go find some books on empowering young women and raising voices, and bring those back to them and give those books to this young girl. And then the next day, her younger sister came in and picked up the lit crate. Maybe it wasn't our decision that it went out to another one of the kids in the family, but we didn't see that one come back until it maybe had been read. So things do tend to work out, but we also know that we do have to, we're on both sides. If we're going to talk one side of it, we have to be willing to examine the other side as well. So we do programs like Lighthouse in the library, which is a meeting place for people to come together and listen to typically a panel discussion. It started, unfortunately, right before COVID. And I think my staff person who started it thought that I meant for her to do one series, but it's been ongoing since, thankfully. And we've done some really fantastic programming with that, from immigrant entrepreneurs to health and safety and going back to school after COVID. Featuring like a high school student and a panel of like administrators and people from the school district and parents. And we did one on police safety and how the police interact with the public. That ended up being a really, really powerful program that was smaller. And they used circles training to do that work. And then our Pizza and Politicians program, I think we talked a little bit about that, is a program where we invite politicians to come and serve on a panel and bring kids in, and they share pizza and talk about what it's like to be in politics and to do that work and represent people. I honestly will tell you, we're going to sunset that program for a while. It's been going on for almost 20 years. I started that program when I was a teen librarian back in the day. And they're still doing it today in different, it's morphed some, but it's still going on. So they said this year felt like they were pulling teeth a little to get both the politicians and the kids there. So we're going to give that one a rest, but we'll find something new to do. We did a kids vote this year that went really well with about 250 kids in November. Taylor Swift versus Bluey. Bluey won. So that was a lot of fun. So we do a lot of civic engagement and civil work as well. And then we recruit a lot of volunteers. So we have a Good Neighbor Book Club. That book club talks about pretty tough topics. And now there's 3 volunteers who run that book club with our staff. And they're looking at what it might become, because they don't just feel it's a book club. They come together for coffee. After the book club ended, they wanted to immediately start another book. And my staff was just like, give me a break, give us a little time to reevaluate. That was the one time we've seen a series where 16 people stayed through the entire series of the book club for doing that book club for multiple sessions. And 8 of those 16 joined the next book club. So we feel like and now there's another 15 people reading the second book, and they don't want it to end. So that's pretty awesome. We also capitalize a lot on staff interests. So we have staff who like to knit. One of our staff has a stutter, and she does not speak as much when she's public. She has a pin that tells people that she stutters, but she has agreed to lead this wonderful knitting class and has even learned to knit left-handed so she can teach both sides how to knit. We have a knitting group that comes in on Tuesday nights and a Monday morning coffee group. Those are just folks running their own show. We're not involved in it. We make the coffee and turn them loose. We've put them in meeting rooms because they get kind of loud and political, but they don't like to be in the meeting rooms. The knitting group is much more welcoming to everyone. The coffee tends to get a little political. So, and we just stay back out of the way. It's really about opening the doors for people to be engaged and be part of the decision making, both staff and volunteers, and finding the bridge partners. You talked about partnerships. So we look for partners not only that we would normally think of, but also partners who might help us reach segments of the community that we aren't reaching already. From our food pantry to the African American Museum in Cedar Rapids, which is a neighboring community, to the art museum, to our children's museum here in town, and other places like that where folks might be going that we might not be reaching, and have the capacity to help us reach those invisible patrons. And then just involving staff in professional development and providing the funding to do that work, to do that professional development and the time. So I've got 2 students right now who are in school for graphic design and social work. Though they both started here and then asked if they could go to school, and I certainly support that. We have a tuition line that helps pay for those things, because we know that benefits the library and has an impact for us overall.
Yeah. And so much about like these creative kind of design and programming tells us about your community and how you're being responsive to the interests, the needs, the personalities, right? Like, sorry guys, you got to go in the conference room. It gets a little loud and rowdy here. I love that. So thank you for sharing. So Shamichael, my next question is for you. So when we were prepping for this conversation, you mentioned something that really stuck with me, because I think like my response to all of this is like, okay, this is great, but in local news, we're always talking about sustainability and like funding and how do we actually make this work happen. And when we were preparing for this conversation, you told me that your kind of response was that libraries need to better communicate their impact. So with rising challenges that we're all pretty familiar with, censorship, funding debates, especially under the incoming new administration, how can libraries effectively measure and share their impact? And what should they focus on to ensure long-term sustainability?
Sure, and I want to acknowledge that a lot of libraries are telling that story, and are telling it well. I think there's an opportunity to make sure that those stories are getting to all of the right people, right? And so Tara Sussman Pena is also on the call with IREX, and we've been working over the last couple of years on a project called the Library Bridge Building Project. It's housed on Web Junction's website, which is a place where a lot of librarians go for professional development. That project, you said something earlier, Sierra, about like, well, hey, we know this isn't happening in every library, and there's opportunities to improve. And that's exactly why we did that project. We wanted to go and see all of the different ways that this was happening at libraries. And so I would first encourage people to go check out that project. It's freely available. You can go to Web Junction's website, search up Library Bridge Building, and you're going to see it there. There's so many resources there. You're going to see 7, 8 different ways that libraries are telling stories, 9 or 10 different ways in which they are measuring impact. Some people are measuring impact on, hey, we did a thing and a diversity of people showed up. Other people are measuring impact by saying, hey, we did a thing and people talk about difficult topics. They wove in, their understanding of things, right? And so there is no one size fits all, for every library. It really is, what does the community need? What does your staff capacity have? Who are you partnering with? But I think the important thing to recognize is that there is work that can be done, regardless of where you are, the size of your library. There are measurable things you can do, and I think that project sheds a good light on it.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to close this out with one more final question here before we get to move to the Q&A. So, you know, a lot in your book, and you talk about the civic renewal and this need for participation, and not just from the institutions or libraries, but from the people that they serve, the people that are attending these programs too, which I think is an important part, an important point. So given everything that we discussed today about the role of libraries in fostering community and democracy, how can everyday people play a role in this civic renewal? And what actions do you hope people will be motivated to take after reading this awesome book?
Yeah, I want to give everyone a couple of things that you can do. The first thing that I want to invite you to do is to take a fresh look at your local library, right? There's so much more than meets the eye. Just take a few moments to explore your library's website, right? Even if the website isn't fully developed, which is the case in some smaller and rural libraries, many of them, even in that case, still have like a Facebook page that has book recommendations and upcoming programming and other resources. But if there is a fully functioning website, actually look at it. When I was with Memphis Public Library System, I met so many people who didn't know that on the website with their library card, they could get access to census data, and they could go find birth and death records. They could get manuals to help them prepare for driving tests, motorcycle, CDL tests. There was even practice exams there.
Wow.
Many libraries have state-specific legal forms that you can get in multiple languages. All of this stuff is actually on your library's website, and many people don't know about it. The second thing I would encourage people to do is to really, particularly, I think, at the moment that we find ourselves in, is to do a little bit of work on two important concepts. The one is intellectual freedom. The second is the freedom to read. Intellectual freedom is about the right to think for yourself, your individual autonomy. It gives people the ability to form their own ideas and opinions by questioning the world around them, right? And this is very, very, very important. It's a cornerstone to democracy right now. As we think similarly about sort of the freedom to read, is essential to democracy. Protecting this freedom ensures that people have diverse information. Look, there's probably a book on a library shelf in your library that you don't like. There's probably a book that you don't want there, but there's some other person in your community that's the very book they need to be able to describe something to their friend, to their child, to their family member, or to themselves, right? That's the beauty of libraries. The third thing I want people to do is this: find a way to get involved. There is something that you can do at your library. Most libraries have a friends group. These are volunteer organizations that support the library through advocacy, fundraising, community engagement. If there's a friends group there, join the friends group. It's like one of the best things you can do. But if you've got a little more time, begin to explore when the next library board election is coming up. I had someone email me a couple of weeks ago and say, "Hey, I'm getting ready to run for the library board, and your book sort of gave me some language there, right?" Do these little small things that can help your library. And then I would say, lastly, consider hosting something at your library. Jenny already talked about it, right? If you're already doing something at your home, maybe you've got a sewing club or a coding or some sort of public speaking club, and you've been doing it at your home or at your church. Consider doing it at the library. You might be surprised at who shows up just because you went to a space that was more public.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly to say one thing we've been doing lately. Our adult services person has an offer to new groups trying to form. If they're trying to form like a chess club or something, we may not have the capability of being at every one of those things, but he is laying the groundwork by providing them instruction on how they can form their group, how they can get started. It's the same work we do every day here. So he's just extending it to help other people expand it out into the community. And I know he's had some interest in an art group, with an art group and a poetry group. So we're doing those things as well.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much. And we have a couple of minutes and a few questions that I'm just going to field to folks. I see somebody has their hand up, and unfortunately, because this is a webinar, you cannot unmute, but definitely feel free to ask the question in the chat. There are a couple of questions about physical spaces and how to activate people when they might not have access to being able to be in person. Like, for example, Shamichael, I had never met you in person. And yet we're able to sort of have this connection and have this conversation. And while local communities have can have some spaces to meet in person, this person was wondering, what if you don't necessarily have the in-person kinds of space? And then similarly, Mark had asked, how can these kinds of physical and digital interactions be resourced when some libraries could have trouble with decision making of sort of how to run programs? So I think these are for Shamichael and for Jenny.
Jenny, I know you all excel and did excel at virtual programming. You want to talk a little bit about what that looks like for y'all?
Oh, I don't think we excelled at it very well, but we tried to do it. I mean, we had some good interest when we were, offline during COVID. We don't do a lot of it now. We offer hybrid programming now for some folks, and we don't get a lot of takers, but we do try to offer it. I mean, I think, for us, it's people just don't want to come online. They want to be here in person. So we haven't done a lot of it, but I know there are libraries out there doing some really solid programming. I think the structure of it is having a consistent times offering. And if you can offer a hybrid model, like we just bought a Meeting Owl, we got a grant, got a Meeting Owl to offer that hybrid type of programming has been super successful for us, so that if people can't come in, and this sounds really weird, but the one thing that we did during COVID that I don't think is that it's not digital, but we analog really. We had staff. We paid all of our staff, despite the fact that we couldn't all be in the building. All of our staff from our part-time to full-time were paid. That was a city decision, and so staff who didn't have necessarily daily work that they could do, we identified people who just might need to talk to someone, and we made phone calls. And we gave some scripts, but really people didn't use them. We just called people in town and said, how you doing? Are you okay? Is there anything we can do for you? Here's some of the things the library is able to do right now. And I think it was super effective. So I do think it's important for us to just face outward. When we turn outward, people do turn toward us.
Mm-hmm.
I put one link in the chat, and this is just kind of a look at ways that you might sort of reimagine existing space. It's a wonderful guide, and there are some other examples there that you can take a look at. The other thing that I want to lift up, and this is something that I think most library folks love, is this site called Programming Librarian, right? And it's filled with really, really amazing ideas. And so if you haven't seen that website, or even if you're familiar with it and haven't gone to it in a while, I'm always amazed at the really amazing ideas that I see there. Now, there was a question about like struggling with decision making. And I think that is a very real thing, right? Because you do sort of have to ask yourself, what can we do? What should we do? What can't we do? And that question around what can't we do, libraries often struggle with that because they do want to try to do all the things, right? And I think this is why it's so important, and Jenny's already mentioned, the importance of partnerships, the importance of scanning neighborhoods and seeing. We always had this orientation in Memphis, like this asset-based view of the community that said, hey, there's already amazing stuff that's happening. There's already some person, some individual, some organization, some collective that's already doing some great stuff. How can we just support them? It might be, we don't have to do a program. We just provide a space for people, right? And I think it's so important for libraries to orient themselves in that way, to scan the community and say, hey, we're not the only ones with this with the superhero cape. There are people like Sierra, right, who are doing really amazing work. Let's find ways to partner with those folks.
And Mark, if I'm reading your question right, you're talking about decision making. I don't know if you're talking about like administrative, like can we do this? As in we have to ask permission to do this, or if you're talking about like, can we do it? Is it possible to do it? We rarely think it's not possible to do something here. I'll give an example. In this end of November last year, one of my staff came and said, hey, we want to move your meeting out of the meeting room that you have. And I said, for what? What's going on? In 2 weeks, we want to do a Taylor Swift birthday party. And I was like, what? Because we plan a quarter in advance. We're planning for next spring right now. We're done with most of our planning for next spring, and we don't typically add a program, but we do occasionally. Something pops up. So I was like, okay, well, first of all, I don't think you should put it in the meeting rooms because it's not going to fit. If you don't know how many people are going to show up. So we just close the library at 5 on a Friday night, which we do. Close at 5 on Friday nights. We're open 8 to 8 the rest of the week. And on Friday nights, we close at 5. And we had a Taylor Swift birthday party. for families. And we had over 250 people show up with 2 weeks
Wow.
notice. So it was pretty fabulous. And really, it's about saying, yeah, let's figure out how to do this. Let's figure out how to make it work. And the other thing I always tell my staff is nothing is going to implode. This world will not explode if you make a mistake. If something isn't done exactly right, we're going to rethink about it. We're going to figure out a new way and we're going to do it again. So giving that safety net to fail or to make a mistake or to have nobody show up at a program, that's okay. What did we learn from it? How can we do it better next time? You know, those are all things that we should be thinking of, but really it's about getting out of the way. I will be very honest and tell you that about 80% of the time, I don't know what's going on in this library. I know that I can walk out the doors and be gone for a week at a conference speaking with Shamichael and Tara, or I can go this place or that place, and the staff have this. They've got it.
That's an incredible note to end on, Jenny. Thank you so much. To all our speakers, there's one last question, which is, Shamichael, is there going to be an audiobook version of your book?
Perhaps. There's some conversations about that, so we'll see. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Shamichael reads it.
Inquiring minds want to know, and your fans would love to hear you read a book. Thank you to our speakers and participants, Sierra, Shamichael, and Jenny. This was really, really a special conversation, and we appreciate it so much. Definitely buy Shamichael's book and keep your eyes out for news futures. On the Library Futures front, we are doing a book talk also next month on a book called Feminist Cyber Law by our friend Amanda Lewandowski. We'll be sending that out over our listserv within the next few weeks. Thanks again. Have good holidays and New Year's, and we'll see you on the internet.
I threw my
Bye-bye.
email in there because I love to talk about this stuff, so feel free to
Oh,
reach.
so good. Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.